Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Member for Tabor-Warner.
Mr. Speaker, under Section 4, subsection 3 of the Election Act, it is my pleasure to table 4 copies of the report of the Chief Electoral Officer on the Stettler by-election held Tuesday, May 9th, 1989.
Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I'm tabling 4 copies of the 1987-88 annual report of the Agricultural Development Corporation.
Introduction of special guests.
The member for Calgary Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Legislative Assembly a very long time and dear friend of our Assembly. She's seated in your gallery. She served as a Conservative member of the legislature from 1979 to 1986 for the riding of Calgary Northwest. I'd ask that Mrs. Sheila Embry stand and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Minister of Labour, followed by Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly 21 students of the Calgary Christian School in Calgary West, and who knows, sitting up there in the members' gallery, how many future MLAs we have with us today. With them is their teacher, Mr. Kevin Francisco. I would ask everyone to give them the traditional warm welcome of the House, and would you please rise to receive it.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing two groups today. The first is a group from the Covenant Community Training Center, some 20 students in the group. They are sitting in the public gallery, and they are accompanied by their teacher, Mrs. Margaret Sloan, and a parent, Mrs. Bonnie Ashton. I would request that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Family and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 36 bright and enthusiastic students from the Mount View School in the constituency of Red Deer South. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Colette McDougall and Mr. Greg Atkinson, and by 3 parents, Dave Weir, Brenda Heemskirk, and Sherida Sawyer. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm reception of this Assembly.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second group is a group of students from St. Pius X School in my riding. There are 20 students in the group, and they are in the public gallery. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Ron Huber. I request that they rise also and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Federal Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, seated in the members' gallery today, accompanied by a former member of the Edmonton City Council, Olivia Beauty, is a guest visiting from China. She is a student who has been here in Alberta, who will be returning to Beijing next week. And this young lady served as an interpreter for a delegation which visited China some time ago. and I'm sure we would wish her well as she returns to her homeland. And I would ask the members of the Assembly to welcome Olivia Beauty and her guest, Bin Lin. Would you please rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly?
Honorable members, I know that direction has been given by the chair with respect to the House leaders that we would try to refrain from introducing family guests, but I wonder if on this occasion you'd be good enough to allow the chair to deviate from its own ruling. Thank you. First, I would like to introduce in the Speaker's Gallery my sister from Selkirk, Manitoba, Ann Ward. If she would stand, please. A very good friend of mine from Port Colborne, Ontario, Jake Reeb. And a very interesting person who started out in Newfoundland, but thank goodness we found each other here, my wife, Jean.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, we in the official opposition are still very concerned about the Department of Health Act, Bill 5. Mr. Speaker, we remain concerned about this government eventually fundamentally trying to change our health care system by privatization. We don't believe that this government can be trusted, Mr. Speaker. We believe that one of their goals clearly is privatization down the way. And Mr. Speaker, I can only refer again to what the Premier said last Tuesday, that further privatization of health care remains an option on this government's agenda. Now, Mr. Speaker, not in the House, but outside to the media, the Minister said that basically this is just a housekeeping bill, and all she really intends to do is transfer 3 extended care facilities in Raymond, Camrose, and Claresholm. Mr. Speaker, if this is the case, then could the Minister explain why the 2 acts which now restrict transfers to hospital boards and nursing home operators are being replaced with a bill which allows transfers to any person or any organization?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I have to correct some of the lead-in to the Leader of the Opposition's question. At no time have I ever referred to Bill 5 as a housekeeping bill. In fact, it's a very important bill which pulls together both the institutional side, which was traditionally under the former Department of Hospitals and Medical Care, and the community side, the former Department of Community and Occupational Health, together. In that sense, it is anything but housekeeping. It is very much substance. There is no effort by this province, as described by the Leader of his Opposition in his question, of a fundamental change by way of privatization of our health facilities. This particular section, Section 11 in Bill 5, currently before the legislature, and which I will look forward to discussing in second reading and committee and however else it proceeds through the House, is in no way a fundamental change with respect to privatization. The facilities which are referred to in the section are meant to refer to 4, in fact, facilities in the province, which are really primarily psychogeriatric facilities, and leaves open certainly the potential of them from moving from being operated and managed by the Department of Health to some other option, including board option. But to describe it as a move to privatization is, I think, a statement which frightens more people than the Leader of the Opposition should not be doing to the people of Alberta, because it's clearly not the province's intent.
Speaker, why put something in a bill if that's not what you mean, Mr. Speaker? Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to come back and ask again specifically why the wording changed to any person or organization from the previous wording if it is an attempt at some point down the line to privatize. Why are you doing it then?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very much aware that the opposition have never liked the fact that included in our delivery system in this province is the potential of and the existence of privately run nursing homes. I know that the members of the opposition do not support that option. We believe it's part of a continuum of health care in our province. What we are not referring to, however, are hospitals in this province that are run by board-governed institutions, but for me to agree with the concept that there should not be a move from being operated and managed by the Department of Health is something I will not agree to.
Mr. Speaker, what we're looking at is legislation that's going to be here with this minister and other ministers, Mr. Speaker.
Long time.
And my question then, to come back to the minister then, with this ridiculous proposal killing a mosquito with a sledgehammer then, Mr. Speaker, if she wants to deal with the 4 institutions, why did she have to bring in this bill which gives herself sweeping power which could lead to privatization down the way? Why is that necessary?
Mr. Speaker, it does not give sweeping power. It certainly does refer to the government health care facility. I am looking to ensure that the intent of the government, which I have attempted to express here today, and the legislative wording are in fact consistent. I have no reason to believe at this moment that they are not consistent, but nonetheless I am reviewing it, and I will look forward to dealing with the matter further at the appropriate time, I would agree, which would be second reading on Bill number 5.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
For Medicare that we had to fight back, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
We want to do it before it's too late.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, to continue with this minister then, Mr. Speaker, the minister says that she just wants some legislation to change 3 institutions. Mr. Speaker, we're suggesting there's ways to do that without having all sweeping legislation that she proposed. Mr. Speaker, the 3 facilities meet the Hospitals Act definition of auxiliary hospitals. If they require new hospital districts, the Hospital Act says right now that the minister can make an order to create them, Mr. Speaker. So even if Bill 5 was worded the same as the previous acts, allowing transfer only to local boards, she could do the same thing. Transfer these sites to existing boards or to new district boards that she creates, Mr. Speaker. She could do that. My question then, Mr. Speaker, is this not true that Bill 5 is specified before a local board? She could use that bill and deal with these institutions adequately without the legislation that she's proposing now.
Well, really, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is asking me to give a legal opinion, which I am unable to do. I would be happy to take the question under advisement and deal with the issue further at second reading and presumably committee.
Mr. Speaker,
You're sponsoring it.
this government gets bullheaded when it gets to second reading, Mr. Speaker.
Closure.
And we want to help this minister out right now. Remember the labor bills. Now my question then, going from the minister's answer then to the previous question, will the minister commit today to withdrawing the bill and bringing back one that specifies local boards? In other words, to go back to the language previously used, Mr. Speaker.
No, I will not, Mr. Speaker.
Shame.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then, Mr. Speaker, we all have worries about this bill. And is it not true, then, that this minister wants this all-encompassing legislation so in the future that this government can bring any privatization they want, including hospitals down the way, Mr. Speaker? That's why they want it.
No, it is not, Mr. Speaker, and I think it is really important to tell the people of Alberta that the issue of privatization, and when is referred to by this government, we are referring to non-medical privatization. There may well be some ways that we can effect some efficiencies in our health system through things like laundry services, disposal of medical wastes, but to say that this is a province that wants to give over to private interest the delivery of health services will not be accomplished by this bill, Mr. Speaker, and is certainly not the intent of the province. I as I indicated to the honorable members, I am ensuring that in fact the Section 11 is declaring what we have as our intent as a government, and I will review that to ensure that that is the case. But to allege that this moves to privatization is irresponsible and frankly is frightening to the people of Alberta and is not the agenda of this government.
Leader of the Liberal Party. Member for Edmonton Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, last week we had the incredible spectacle of one Minister of the Crown going around threatening the federal government with lawsuits, and another Minister of the Crown acting as if nothing had happened, in fact berating newspapers in Alberta for building a story where none existed, and saying that no legal action was even contemplated against the federal government. One thing appears to be clear, Mr. Speaker, and one thing appears to be uncontradicted at this moment, and that is that this matter will be discussed at the upcoming First Minister's Conference. My question to the Premier is this: does Alberta recognize the right, any right, of the federal government in protecting the environment?
Mr. Speaker, I guess the honourable member hasn't been listening in the legislature when we've dealt with this matter before. As I recall mentioning to the House that there are certain areas in the Constitution that the federal government have responsibilities for such things as navigable waters, fisheries, and therefore have a role to play in environmental impact in those areas.
Well, I wonder if the Honourable Premier would outline the official position of his government with respect to Alberta's position and the federal government's position vis-a-vis the pulp mills.
Mr. Speaker, as I've also said before in the House, that the province has jurisdiction over development of natural resources and certainly the forestry matters, and we will continue to insist on that jurisdiction.
What's his position?
Mr. Speaker, my last question to the Premier is this: does he believe that there is anything that the federal government is doing in singling out Alberta, using Alberta as sort of the precedent with respect to coming into a province and involving itself in environment in a bigger way than was up till this time known or expected?
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, there has been a discussion and explanation for the House already in this session, been provided by the Minister of Environment and the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, where they pointed out that we've had an agreement for years with the federal government, and that agreement provides for cooperation in the areas of environmental matters, because there are certain areas that are the responsibility of Ottawa and certain ones that are provincial responsibilities. And then there was the matter of the Rafferty Dam decision, which has caused some legal problems for the federal government. But I don't think there will be in the long run, unless the federal government changes its way of thinking, a problem of, again, having an agreement which covers this matter. It's worked very well in the past. I think we can do it in the future. I think there is nothing inconsistent at all in what the two ministers are saying. We are going to work in a cooperative way to come to an agreement with the federal government, but at the same time, we will not allow our jurisdiction to be invaded.
Cypress Redcliffe, followed by Calgary Mountain View, Calgary Northwest, then Smoky River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development. On Friday last, the residents of Redcliffe received a notice that very few communities are ever subject to, and that's the closing of a major plant in the community and the loss of 500 jobs, direct jobs in the area. Mr. Speaker, I met with a group of citizens on Saturday, of union and town citizens, relating to what we could do at the plant. My question to the minister is, you'll have your chance to. My question to the minister is, is there any more steps that he is considering taking towards achieving any more operation of that plant?
Mr. Speaker, let me say at the outset and indicate my deep appreciation to the Honourable Member for Cypress Redcliffe and the Honourable Member for Medicine Hat for their thoughtfulness as we did proceed through this very difficult stage of negotiations with Consumers Packaging, whereby we did offer them a substantial amount of support. And the letter was released by way of a news release from two individuals from this Legislative Assembly that indicated that we would offer up to $7.5 billion by way of a capital grant to the restructuring. We also indicated that we stand ready to offer any type of support that they deem advisable so that we could retain what we considered a very, very important industry to the Cypress Redcliffe constituency and to the Medicine Hat area. Recognizing the importance of this, Mr. Speaker, after I have further consultations with the Honourable Member from Medicine Hat and the Honourable Member from Cypress Redcliffe, it is my hope later today to have further communication with the President of Consumer Packaging, Mr. Thomas Tinmouth, so that we can hopefully find out if the decision is final. If not, we wish to proceed with further negotiations. We received the telex of the news release indicating that it would be closed down late Friday. We hope to have further communication with them with the extent of having them change their mind, because we recognize again the importance that this does play to that particular region of the province.
Mr. Speaker, my supplementary question to the Minister is that will the Minister, after he has contact with the Chief Executive Officer of Consumer Glass, then consider meeting or having staff meet with the committee that was formed by myself and others on Saturday to discuss the future of the plant?
Mr. Speaker, we are more than happy to work with individuals in the community, recognizing the serious impact that this is going to have, to see if we can't spur additional economic development. But I also wish to leave the Honourable Member with the assurance that we're going to work with the group that is there to develop further economic development activity. We wish to have further communication with Consumers Packaging. Plus, we have had extensive discussions, both on a personal, by telephone, and through correspondence with Consumers Packaging. We wouldn't want anybody to think that we didn't put every effort into making sure that the plant was maintained in the Redcliffe area. And even acknowledging the release that was put out on Friday, we're going to continue with our work because we don't wish to leave any stone unturned.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is to the Minister of Career Development, and I wonder if the Minister can assure the Assembly if her department is prepared to take any action necessary and work with this local committee in the event or in the near future.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is a program if in such unfortunate circumstances, and that is that the province, working with the federal government and the workers at any given work site in this situation, as well as companies, and so the four groups get together and form what we call an industrial adjustment committee. And Mr. Speaker, we will make every effort to provide whatever services to each and every individual employee should they find themselves unemployed.
Calgary Mountain View, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On June the 8th, the Minister of Tourism claimed in this House in regards to funding for the World Blitz Chess Championships in Calgary, and I quote, "At no time was my brother involved with reference to the grant or grant application," end quote. Mr. Speaker, I have in my hand a copy of a letter dated July 22nd, 1988, addressed to J. Sparrow, Sparrow Group, Nisku, Alberta. Dear Jim, following is a letter which meets Calgary's requirements and...
Thank you, Honourable Member. Order. If indeed you're about to file this with the table so that all members of the House have a chance to look at it. The other thing is, if you're quoting from a letter, I trust that you've had the permission of the person who wrote the letter to release it.
And the other part is perhaps you'd be much more succinct about getting to the punchline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm quite happy to leave a copy with you. Attached is a draft letter for the minister's signature, which outlines proposed procedures for paying the Tourism Department grant. Mr. Speaker, to the minister, how did Mr. Jim Sparrow appear to come to be involved in the process of drafting correspondence for the minister's signature, when, according to the minister's own words, his brother was at no time involved with reference to the grant or grant application?
Mr. Speaker, I would like to see a copy of what he's talking about. I have no knowledge of what the issue is with reference to that letter, so I cannot comment on what other people outside this House do.
Mr. Speaker, given that the letter which eventually came back from the Tourism Department resembles closely the draft which Mr. Hamilton sent to Mr. Jim Sparrow, will the minister then explain why it was that a key organizer of this chess tournament appeared to turn to the minister's brother for assistance and advice?
Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, in May of last year, well before what the member from Mountain View is talking about, we received a proposal that was being sent to the City of Calgary, made by Mr. Robert Hamilton from Global Chess Group, Inc., which was involved in New Brunswick the previous year on putting on a similar event. My first involvement with that was a call from Mr. Brian Foster, who called and to notify me that this proposal was coming to us and being sent to Calgary. And I immediately looked at the proposal when it was dropped off at our office, and as we do in many other instances, called Mr. Al Richards, who works for the Calgary Convention and Tourism Authority, a bureau in Calgary, and to inform him of the project and that we were expecting to receive a copy of it. Proponents continually work with everybody they can, and in this instance, looks like they knew my brother. We have definitely at no time, I can reiterate, that did my brother be involved with us or the department with reference to the grant. We met, as I stated earlier, with the proponents, Mr. Robert Hamilton of Global Chess, in August with my deputy minister, my executive assistant, and another department member. The department then took that presentation and worked with the group along with the City of Calgary, and later in October agreed to get into a contract with the Global Chess, trying to put on an event similar to what was handled the year before in New Brunswick.
Mr. Speaker, will the minister now admit that there is at least the appearance of a conflict of interest and a contradiction with the minister's earlier statement with respect to his brother's involvement in this grant application?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that there's any conflict of interest or whatsoever. What I see in front of me here is a letter dated in July that the member had, which is well after the discussions that took place and the approval of City Council in Calgary and the May date that we received the proposal. We'd officially received the proposal months before this.
There is also another difficulty with the material that's filed, that the second letter is without letterhead and it's unsigned. It's not written on a blank page, so that raises other questions. Chair recognizes Calgary Northwest, followed by Smoky River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On June the 12th, In this assembly, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, regarding the Dominion glass plant mentioned earlier, stated that this government, and I quote, would do everything within our power to ensure those jobs are kept within the province of Alberta, close quote. He further stated that there is a plan developed to save the plant and save those jobs. On Friday of last week, as we heard, the officials announced that the plant will be closing. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Why hasn't this minister made more effort to keep this plant, which is environmentally sound, when Dayashawa, which is questionable in terms of its environmental impact, has been offered more than 10 times the amount of money that this plant has been offered?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his concern as it relates to this, because it's a common concern that we all share, and that's why I indicated to the honourable member that we were working so closely with Consumers Packaging, and I'm sure that the honourable member will have made available to him, if he hasn't already received it, a copy of the release that has been put out by the honourable member from Cypress Redcliffe and the honourable member from Medicine Hat, indicating the steps that we had taken, the plan of attack that we had involved ourselves in with the hopes of maintaining the plant in the Redcliffe area. I reinforce what I indicated to the honourable member from Cypress Redcliffe, that we did offer a substantial grant to the tune of some $7.5 million to the plant for refitting purposes, because we did recognize the importance of it. I am going to have further discussions with the President, Mr. Thomas Tinmouth, with the hopes of them giving reconsideration to the statement that they did issue on Friday.
Well, $7.5 million is chicken feed compared to Dayashawa. My second question is also to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. How can this minister say that this government has a commitment to economic diversification when this company, which is the largest secondary industry employer on the prairies, is closing up and moving to BC?
Mr. Speaker, it's amazing how the attitudes can change in the event that the grant would have been given and would have been accepted, the $7.5 million. I'm sure they wouldn't have indicated at that time it was chicken feed, and they would have been critical of us for offering that type of money in support of a company within Alberta, as they have done in the past. But we recognize that we do have to support some segments of the industry. We're going to continue to do so, because our first priority is job creation within this province, so that we can continue with that strong economic climate that we presently enjoy.
Well, my third question then is directed to the Minister of Environment. Since the government in Volume 1 of its throne speech made a commitment to recycling, what does the Minister of Environment propose to do with the 40,000 tons of glass that this plant had recycled in the past? Shall we have them delivered to your office, Mr. Minister?
I would think not, Mr. Speaker. Hopefully not, anyway. But certainly, if there is a problem there, I'd be glad to discuss this with the Minister of Economic Development and other appropriate government officials, including those in my department, to see how the problem should be dealt with. Thank you.
Member for Smoky River. Smoky River, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government has a good record of supporting the need of adequate water through the irrigation projects of southern Alberta. And this helps, of course, in the economic viability of agriculture. My question is directed to the Minister for the Environment. There are many parts of the province that have large tracts of very flat land that require drainage to assist the economic viability of these regions. What steps is the Minister prepared to take to enhance this needy program?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are two programs, the Water Management and Erosion Control Program and in the Water Services Development Plan. Both of these programs are ongoing, and the department is continually monitoring these programs and continually trying to enhance these programs. It's a program that we hope to continue for some time.
To the Minister of Environment, is there a long-range plan for the continued development of drainage programs to assist in allowing better productivity of this vast area of agricultural land? And I'd just like to point out that I'm not referring specifically to the drainage of wetlands. It's just the agricultural land.
Well, Mr. Speaker, This situation of drainage of agricultural lands and water management projects refers specifically to, or more specifically, to the northern regions, and in the Peace River region in particular. There will be a program developed this summer. There will be public hearings, and those public meetings are scheduled for July as to how the total program should be in effect without affecting specifically the wetlands.
My final question, what sort of funding are we looking at, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the total program is somewhat in the area of $5 million.
Okay. Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Premier. Foreign corporations have been allocated perpetual control over almost the entire green zone, 30% of Alberta's land mass. The foreign-owned companies propose a mechanical clear-cut logging operation in support of a mechanized pulp mill that's going to ship raw pulp out to Japan and the United States. I wonder if the Premier is concerned that these forest projects create jobs at only 1/4 the rate of an average forest project in Canada.
Mr. Speaker, those projects are a very important part of the diversification of Alberta's economy. We have a tremendous forest resource, and in the past it's not played a great role in the development and broadening of our economy. We're determined that the forest resource does play a bigger part, that it provides opportunities for young people with jobs, opportunities for communities to grow and expand in a healthy way. But the projects will proceed on the basis of sound environmental controls and regulations. Now, the honourable member may want to go into further detail with the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife when he's in the House, but to make it clear that the government believes these projects are important to the future strength of our economy, will be handled in an environmentally sound way, and everything possible will be done to make sure the development works with the people's desires.
Well, there aren't very many jobs, that's the point. In view of the fact that the taxpayers have placed $1 billion at risk in these projects, I'd like to know why pay these foreign companies to rape our lands and pollute our rivers.
Of course we don't, Mr. Speaker, and that's a foolish allegation from the honourable member.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of the Environment, I'm wondering, in view of the fact that the government ignores the environment in these matters, if the Minister has complained to the Premier that his department has been reduced to the status of a bystander in these forestry projects, and that there's no environmental impact assessment federally or provincially on the forestry aspect of these projects.
Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, there is a very, very comprehensive, very, very extensive forest management agreement which addresses all the questions related to the forestry aspect of pulp mill development and other forestry development in northern Alberta. And I would think that the honourable member from Jasper Place should know that by now.
Edmonton Whitemud, followed by Edmonton Kingsway, Calgary, Milliken, West Yellowhead, Edmonton Meadowlark, Calgary Fish Creek, Edmonton Highlands, Clover Bar, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, the provincial government has leased out an area of land at 109th Street and 9th Avenue in the Edmonton Whitemud constituency. The tenant, Myers Metals, has used the land as an industrial waste site and dump, and I point out that this site is fenced in with barbed wire fence on top. There's a fellow in a brown uniform inspects it every day. In any case, Mr. Speaker, there has been complaints and concerns that have arisen that this site has been used to store hazardous industrial waste, possibly including PCBs. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Environment, Can the minister confirm what toxic or industrial waste material has been dumped on this Crown land, which is at 109th Street and 9th Avenue in the White Mud constituency?
Mr. Speaker, no, I can't, not at this particular time, but certainly it's the kind of question I can take under notice, and if there has been a pollution situation at that particular site, then I'm sure that the Pollution Control Division of my department were on the scene. If they weren't, then obviously they would have some answering to do, but it's certainly one of the things that I can check down with the department and get an answer for the honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Environment, is the minister not aware that staff from my office contacted his office 3 weeks ago with no replies, that residents contacted the previous elected representative in White Mud, who were assured action would be undertaken? Is the minister not saying that he has received any of that communication? Has the minister not taken any action on that communication?
Two questions in one. We'll settle for the first. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I get a lot of letters every day relative to specific issues, and I try to deal with those issues the best that I possibly can. It could very well be that if that issue was brought to my attention, it is now in the department. And if it isn't, I have given an undertaking to the honourable member to find out for him and to act in a responsible manner. And that's precisely what I will do. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, is the minister not aware that there were assurances given that this site would be clean by the end of May, that the city bylaw enforcement has issued orders? Is the minister's office, is the minister himself not aware as what is...
Thank you, honourable member. We're now up to the third question in the supplementary. Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is quite simple, no, and is quite honest. No, I am not aware, but I will check it down. I will check it down, and he will get some action almost immediately.
Edmonton Kingsway. Edmonton Kingsway, not Edmonton White Mud. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. The announcement by Consumers Packaging Limited of the closure of the Dome Glass plant in Redcliffe is more proof that the Getty government cannot be trusted to look after the workers and the industries of Alberta. Contrary to what the Minister of Economic Development and Trade said last week, the Chief Executive Officer of the parent company Enfield Corporation, Mr. Michael Blair, said that the closure was part of a rationalization of production to accommodate increased competition from the United States because of the free trade deal. Will the minister now admit that the free trade agreement that this government so strongly supported is the reason that Dome Glass is going under, striking a major blow to the Redcliffe community?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Free trade. Well, a loss of 500 jobs to a town of less than 4,000 is a major blow, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, free trade.
Does the minister realize that even with a monopoly in the glass manufacturing in Canada, Enfield Corporation will not be able to compete with the two big U.S. giant companies that, with a series of mergers and takeovers, now control 2/3 of the U.S. industry?
Speaker, I'm happy to reinforce what I indicated to previous honourable members, the concern that we do have as it relates to the plant in Redcliffe. We are going to work very closely with the individuals concerned, as the Honourable Minister of Career Development indicated, and our department, so that in the event that they do proceed with their announced plans that were announced on Friday, that we can involve our department and other departments in spurring economic development in that area so that we can create additional jobs.
Mr. Speaker, he just lost the bidding war with BC, but in any case, the American companies will just cannibalize the industry in either, whichever one wins. Mr. Speaker, recycled glass is piling up around here in Alberta, and the Environment Minister was not even aware there was a problem. Will he promise to get on this problem promptly, and is he going to continue to let his colleagues push him aside again and again on matters of the environment?
Bill Askew.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the recycling program in the province of Alberta was one of the first of its kind in this country, as a matter of fact. It's a reasonable program. It's working well. I don't see glass piling up all over the province. And as far as I know, the return on deposits and all the other things associated with glass recycling are working very, very well indeed. As a matter of fact, have served as a model for other provinces and other jurisdictions in this country.
Member for Calgary-Milliken, followed by West Yellowhead, then Edmonton-Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, the provinces and the federal government set up a program to encourage immigration of business people to Canada a couple of years ago. It's called the Entrepreneurial Immigration Program, and it's to encourage people to come to this country that have expertise, capital, create jobs here, create industry. And lately I've had some calls, and I'm very concerned. I understand that Alberta often approves, under this program, applications, business applications, and then we get rejected by the federal government. And yet, I read that most of the business immigrants coming into Canada are going to Ontario. I wonder if the minister could please advise the Assembly, is Ontario getting its preferential treatment over the province of Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question. We have not got the statistics from the federal government. As a matter of fact, there have been some people raise concerns because it was the province of Quebec that they understood were having quite a few of their particular applications approved and not Alberta.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. And then there's another concern, and that's even though many of the mid-sized immigrants have been rejected, as I understand that some of the very, very wealthy immigrants have got approved by ministerial approval because they're extremely wealthy. And have any of these been approved in Alberta by this route of it?
Mr. Speaker, the only route for business immigration in Alberta would be an immigrant visa. And as to how the federal government or the minister responsible, the Honourable Barbara McDougall, may use ministerial approval, I obviously can't answer that question.
Final supplement, Mr. Speaker. As I understand, the federal government's put a moratorium on immigration out of Hong Kong due to the events in Beijing. It's a 6-month moratorium, and at the end of that 6 months there will be, as I understand, a deluge of applications. A lot of good people there that would like to come probably to Alberta. Could the minister please advise, are you getting your department geared so that if we do get a large number of applications that we can process these fairly expeditiously?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, to the Honourable Member for Calgary-Milliken, in terms of the processing in the province of Alberta, I think that most business immigrants would indicate that they've been handled very fairly and that the processing has gone quickly. Mr. Speaker, the problem is that something like a year ago, the federal government centralized their approval process to Hull. And in that space of time, there has been a giant backlog in the approvals that have gone forward from the province of Alberta, already having received the province's approval, and they have met some kind of a blockage with respect to the federal government. The Honourable Minister, in her favour at least, has struck a committee to examine this situation. There is an Alberta individual on that committee, and I have discussed at length with him the particular province vis-a-vis the province of Alberta, and I hope that message will be drawn loud and clear. It's been communicated at every level of the department, including the Minister's office.
West Yellowhead, followed by Edmonton-Meadowlark, Calgary-Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, town councils from Wainwright to Jasper, Medicine Hat to Banff have actively been lobbying everyone from VO officials to MPs to the Prime Minister in an attempt to halt the massive cuts proposed on passenger rail service in our province. The Federal Transport Minister has asked for a special report on rail abandonment from the National Transportation Agency as a result of the pressures from the Conservatives of such eastern provinces as Quebec and Nova Scotia, but none from Alberta. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Since the government is obviously lagging behind not only other provinces but other levels of government in our own province when it comes to opposing the via cuts, how can we now take the minister seriously when he tells us he has expressed his strongest concern to the federal government on this issue?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to indicate to the honourable member, as I have done in the past, that we have communicated both to the federal transportation minister plus to the individual members of parliament from the province of Alberta, plus we have made a submission to the National Transportation Agency.
Mr. Speaker, it's one thing to say that you're concerned or that you're looking into an issue, but can the Minister of Tourism then tell us today that he has a real and specific strategy to pressure the federal government into committing itself to saving such obvious, viable routes as Edmonton-Jasper and Calgary-Banff?
Mr. Speaker, along with the Minister of Economic Development, our staffs are working on strategy, and yes, we do, and are concerned about the loss of that service and have expounded it many times in the public.
Mr. Speaker, in 1986, the federal transport minister stated quite frankly that transcontinental services would never be abandoned. With this minister, even though he was a Conservative MP at that time, will he take the federal government to task on this specific broken promise? The Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the honourable member, let me reinforce and underscore what we've indicated on a number of occasions in the Legislative Assembly, that we are going to involve ourselves in a very forceful way to maintain what we consider an essential service. As the honourable member is aware, we do not know for a fact what segments of Via Rail are going to be cut back because they're still going through that management decision. But we have placed on record with the individuals I mentioned earlier in response to his initial question our forceful position, recognizing the importance that it does play to the province of Alberta.
Time for question period has expired. I wonder if perhaps we could have the attention of the House for the next few minutes as the Chair hands out the ruling with regard to the purported point of privilege as raised a number of days back by the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View. For future reference, the Chair would like to give the House a few guidelines on presenting a prima facie case of privilege. Number one, the member should confine his statement to one of facts of the case and little more. Two, the member will have an opportunity to make his presentation to the House only once. Three, the member's presentation is limited to a maximum of 30 minutes. Four, if a member's allegations involve another member of the House, that member affected will be allowed to respond, again limited to a maximum of 30 minutes. Finally, I hope the House will entertain the Chair's request to allow it some time, in some cases considerable time, to examine and rule on cases of privilege presented before it, as the Chair must consider and research many sources. Privilege is a very serious matter indeed. The Chair would like to thank all honourable members for their patience while dealing with matters in this regard. The Chair has had under consideration a complaint based on a purported point of privilege brought forward in the House by the member for Calgary Mountain View. The facts of the case, as the House will recall, involve the alleged actions of a landlord against certain tenants, taken in response to the tenants contacting their member of the Legislative Assembly. The member has claimed that this constituted an impediment to his function as a member. The Chair has looked very carefully at this issue After consulting numerous authorities and precedents from both the United Kingdom and Canadian Houses of Parliament, it is clear that for privilege to be claimed, a member must be impeded in a part of his duties that fall within the definition of a, quote, proceeding of Parliament, close of quote. This raises the question as to what is a proceeding of Parliament. Joseph Mango, in his book Parliamentary Privilege in Canada, explains, as a technical parliamentary term, proceedings are the events and the steps leading up to some formal action, including a decision taken by the House in its collective capacity. All of these steps and events, the whole process by which the House reaches a decision, the principal part of which is called debate, are proceedings. He further states at page 74 that there may well be work carried out by members in an official capacity, but which extends beyond parliamentary work and which receives no protection of privilege. In essence, the authorities clearly state that while a member may do any number of official things, not all are directly related to proceedings of Parliament and therefore are not entitled to the protection of privilege. Assistance in establishing whether or not the member for Calgary Mountain View was involved with his constituents in a proceeding of Parliament has been given by Canadian House of Commons Speaker Jerome in November of 1978, when he stated, "Privilege has always been interpreted very strictly by this House because there is no reason why a general privilege or right to some kind of special treatment should surround a member of the House of Commons or any other citizen before our boards or commissions or in the everyday work we perform as citizens in this country, except insofar as it relates to the basic or essential function of carrying out our obligations as elected members in assisting or in participating in the proceedings of the House of Commons itself." As I indicated earlier, parliamentary privilege is that which surrounds us here and ensures that we are able to carry out the basic function of participating in the proceedings of this House. Mango goes on to say further, "The duties for which a member of Parliament can claim the protection of privilege are his parliamentary duties, particularly in his primary duty or service to this House of Commons here. At times, the line distinguishing these duties as a representative on one side and parliamentary duties on the other side is very fine." In July of 1980, Madam Speaker Sauvé addressed this very question, and I quote from her ruling, "While I am only too aware of the multiple responsibilities, duties, and also the work the member has to do relating to his constituency, as Speaker I am required to consider only those matters which affect the member's parliamentary work. That is to say, whatever duty a member has to his constituents, before a valid question of privilege arises in respect of any alleged interference, such interferences must relate to the member's parliamentary duties." In other words, just as a member is protected from anything he does while taking part in a proceeding in Parliament, so too must an interference relate to the member's role in the context of parliamentary work. Close of quote. There is no doubt that the member for Calgary Mountain View was acting in an official capacity. That he was acting in a parliamentary capacity is not so clear. Beauchesne's 6th edition, citation 92, clearly states, "A valid claim of privilege in respect to interference with a member must relate to the member's parliamentary duties and not to the work the member does in relation to that member's constituency." In the case as presented to the House by the honourable member, a dispute occurred between two or more strangers to this House, which indirectly involved a member in his constituency work. A similar case involving an individual who attempted to prevent third parties from contacting their member of Parliament was brought forward in the House of Commons June the 2nd of 1981. In respect to the alleged breach of privilege at that time, the case is comparable with the matter of hand. In the ruling of Madam Speaker Sauvé, The fine line between a member's constituency duties and his parliamentary duties was recognized, and the chair was reluctant, it seems, to rule that the member's actions were within the definition of a proceeding of Parliament, and therefore no case of privilege could be claimed. It is with the same reluctance that the chair observes that the honourable member for Calgary Mountain View was undoubtedly acting in an official capacity and in a sensitive way. However, it cannot be established that his duties within the narrow confines of a proceeding of Parliament were affected. I compliment the member on his obvious concern and efforts on behalf of his constituents. However, remedies do not seem to be available from this House through the claim of privilege. Thank you. Orders of the day. Might we revert